Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Digital Summit Spotlight interview series. Over the course of this series, we're doing interviews with thought leaders across digital marketing space and beyond, including some of our top speakers that we're really excited to have slotted for in 2024. Today, I am thrilled to be joined by Jen Brace, the Chief Futurist at Ford Motor Company. Jen, thanks so much for taking the time to be here today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So, in a minute, we're going to dig into your session that's coming up at Digital Summit. But first, I want to talk about your role as a futurist and just really what that means, kind of level set for the audience, what that job entails, and what you bring to the table every day.
Sure, no problem. So I get the question a lot. A lot of people don't know what it means, and that's okay. I expect it. But what myself and my team, what we're trying to do is pay attention to the signals and the trends that are happening around us. Consider how that might change the environment that we are operating within, or consider how it might impact the product services that we are developing, so that we can help teams be better prepared for the future. We do tell teams that we don't predict the future, which is often a little bit of a disappointment, if I'm honest, but that we do help them prepare for the future by really using strategic foresight to think through how things might change and evolve and how we can start to see those signals early and then be ready for them when they arrive.
Great. So, when we're thinking about your session coming up in Las Vegas, titled Thinking Like a Futurist, tell us a little bit about the intention of that particular session and what you'd like to leave the audience with.
Sure. So, my whole intent here is giving people some more tips for thinking about the future. So, often what we do is we assume that the future looks a lot like today with maybe a little more technology, because thinking about a future that is uncertain makes people uncomfortable. And what I try to do is pull back some of that discomfort and ask people to lean into it a little bit, giving them some tips on ways that they can look at trends, understand what's happening, and then bring up some of the questions that should come up when you start to see things happening and how you might be better prepared to respond to it, so that you can lean into some of those uncertainties instead of feeling like it's easier to kind of bury your head in the sand or just hope that tomorrow looks just like today. Instead, you can get ahead of it and you can start to consider those alternative futures um, earlier on, so that you've got a future of choice instead of one of constraint.
I love that, and I think it's so relevant to the marketing community today. It is definitely something we're challenged with on a day-to-day basis is what comes next. Really trying to be on the cutting edge and not being afraid of what comes next, I think is a huge part of it as well. So I love that it's really about, charging forward with information that you can feel confident in. So recently, you released the Further with Ford report that comes out annually. And one of the big takeaways from that report that I was reading was people in general, not just marketers, not just,
Yeah.
folks within Ford, but people in general are pretty weary of AI. And I think that's a common thread that we've seen across all of our marketing sessions. And that's why AI is such a huge focus for us at Digital Summit this year. So what are your predictions, maybe leaning on the report a little bit, about how AI
Sure.
will just impact content in general and that content production strategy and how we go about producing that in the marketplace right now?
Yeah, thank you for bringing up our Further with Ford report. We do publish it annually. And you're right, this year we couldn't get away from talking about AI. We still can't constantly. We have teams asking us about it, as they should be. And we have a section called AI Wary because there is a tension there. You called it out perfectly. There's a huge tension in how is AI going to impact us, and what are we going to trust, knowing that we are um, somewhat concerned about it. So recognizing that people are saying half of people say that they either don't understand AI or that they're afraid of it. That's a number that has increased over the past 4 years, 5 years. We asked the question 5 years ago. So seeing that there is kind of this growing concern over it, but alongside of that, also creating some of this tension is people are also expecting it to be a huge part of their life, or they're expecting that it's going to have a big role in their life. They know that it's coming, but they don't know exactly how it's going to impact them. They're worried about job loss. So we see 68% of people saying that they were worried about AI creating a massive job loss for others. But then when we turned it on them, we saw that only 39% thought that it might impact themselves. So this idea that it's going to happen to other people, hopefully it's not going to happen to me. I do think this kind of goes along with this idea of sometimes being afraid of uncertainty in the future that, it's going to happen to other people, but not myself. So we thought that was a really interesting um, point within when it comes to like this tension that gets created with respect to AI. I think we can see it within marketing too, right? Especially if we're thinking about what's happening with content creation. How is it being created? If AI can generate it more quickly, is that going to become a threat? I think it's fair to be concerned about that. What we also see is people wanting to know who they can trust. There is an understanding that misinformation is easier to create, so they want to understand that they have a trusted source of information, and I believe that that's where brands um, can really speak more authentically to customers about number one, how are they using AI? Where is it helping them in their business? Because it also creates some efficiencies. It can help create efficiencies in the ways that we are connecting with customers and understanding who our customers are and how we can better connect with them. But this is where um, I feel like there is some opportunity for businesses to be very upfront with the way that they're using it and the way that consumers are understanding that use. Um, will help with that conversation, will help with me showing up authentically with making sure that you are able to have that trusted source, because consumers want it. They recognize that there's a lot happening that they don't understand, so they're looking for help. And I do believe that there is opportunity there within the marketing field to help provide them with that sense of security and understanding.
Yeah, I think both internally and externally. I think the communication within our teams of what are we using AI for, what are we not?
Sure.
What's that boundary that we're going to set? And then again, talking about that externally, I've worked for a lot of different media brands, and now what used to be having to identify sponsored content, which was something that was paid to be on there. Now it's AI generated content needs to be identified in that way, and I think that's a
Right.
really interesting shift. And so, does that make people more skeptical? Does that make them less skeptical because it's coming from a source that they trust? If they're a real, GPT nut, I don't know. I think it's going to be interesting to see.
Yeah, great question. Great question. And I'm not sure we have the answer to that yet in terms of it. Some of it might be with, well, how well did that content fit me? How much do I trust it? How much do I think that that is giving me, um, you know, what I need, or does it get me better? Is it getting me better? That's that feeling sometimes where the search results are a little bit too good, where you're like, oh,
Yeah.
dang it knows me better than I know myself. Um, there are, you get into that space of that can help to build the trust, right? Or sometimes it might creep you out a little bit if it's too good. Um, but
Yeah,
yeah,
I think
that's
it's
this is
that
the whole
balance
space.
we've
These are the
seen.
questions that we're all asking ourselves right now, right? What does it mean? Like, how do we continue to evolve in find efficiencies? Because ultimately, that is what AI and things like large language models like ChatGPT should be helping us do, is become more efficient. And that is where we see people having some optimism in terms of it taking some things off of their plate. We are seeing that people feel overwhelmed. We're seeing that people want to have a better work-life balance. So yeah, where can it be used internally, externally to help build on those efficiencies, the things that it can do really well and the things that it can take off of our plate, um, provide some sense of hope and optimism as well.
100%. I just in my own experience, I was wary of it a bit at the beginning, but a lot of the, top thought leaders that I follow were really about you're just going to have to embrace it. That's the reality, especially with marketing, with generative content being a
Yeah,
huge part of what everybody is talking about. And I think people are doing it in a really beautiful way where they're using it, like you said, to be more efficient, but they're also bringing in the human element of what they know about their brand, the data that they know about their brand, and using that to create the prompts, so that it's not just this sort of robotic voice that's coming out. You're using it to be just work a little bit faster and maybe get off work at 5 o'clock for
right.
the first time ever. I don't know.
We can all aspire to do that.
I know. So kind of switching gears here, more talking specifically about your role as a futurist and your team and what it brings to Ford. So, in my experience, and a lot of other marketers probably will relate to this, we are expected to sort of have this crystal ball about what's going to come in, how many event registrations are going to come in the next couple of weeks, how many people are going to purchase the product before Christmas. There's always
Yep,
this expectation that with all this data we have, like you said, we'll be able to predict the future. But
sure.
I think some marketers are really good at being able to formulate what the future of their particular brand or product looks like, and then others just don't have time and they barely scratch the surface and they kind of lean on their gut reactions, which I think is totally fine. But your role is really about, if I'm understanding it correctly, it's really about providing that actionable data, doing that research and getting to understand the trends that are happening right now to be able to predict, to be able to, work on the future. So what tools does your team use to be able to do
Sure.
that? And so that, the other teams that you work with internally, whether that's marketing or product development or anybody, can feel really confident in the data that you're bringing in.
Yeah, sure. So, um, full disclosure, there's not always the perfect set of data that is going to tell us what the future looks like. Data is usually telling us what we see today. So
Mm,
often what we're doing is we're looking at high level trends. So what you'll see on the Further with Ford site, I call it the 10,000-foot view. I tell teams this is the start of the conversation. This is a general population survey. It is global. We are trying to understand what we see happening around the world. And that should spark often some questions internally on how we might be able to use this or what it might mean for our customers. So we often think of it as here's a data point that is the start of the conversation. How can we dig a little
mm,
bit deeper to understand how it might impact a more specific level of who we're trying to connect with? The other thing that we do is we're constantly scanning. Like I tell people if they're interested in working with me or my team, I hope you like to read. We do a ton of reading. Do a ton of scanning and understanding what we see happening around the world because we consider all of those signals and inputs so that we can start to to look at those signals and look at those interesting things that are happening around the world. And they're typically well outside of automotive. We're typically looking at things like what's happening in medical research, what's happening in education, what's happening with demographics, what's happening with politics, what's happening with sustainability. All of those things can start to build upon one another. And if you see something happening in one place, what happens when you cross it with something else happening elsewhere? So if you see a signal in and how AI is being used in education. Well, what happens if you cross that with maybe a sustainability effort that you're seeing elsewhere, and how might those start to build and layer upon one another to create new spaces? So often we're spending a lot of time tracking signals and looking to see what's happening around the world in all kinds of different fields. And then we have to zero that in. And what I say is we kind of have to connect some dots in terms of why do we care, or what might that
mhm,
mean? How might that create opportunity or spaces down the road? Or what might that mean for what we're seeing today in terms of how people are reacting or how they might start to react to things in the future? Do we see demographic shifts? Do we see a younger generation having a different perspective? Technology is a great place, right? Where younger generations tend to be more open to technology and AI and things like that than older generations. How might that impact the way that you are communicating with your customers? So we bring all of that into play when we're working with teams so that we can, number one, understand as best we can, where are people at today? And then how do we see that shifting or evolving moving forward? So it depends a lot on if the team is looking to focus on something that is very in the now. Um, then you've got data often around what we see happening today. If we're looking more, and often, of course, my team is focused more on what's happening further out, could be 5 years out, 10 years out. Um, what signals do we see today that can help give us clues into how the future might look different or what might resonate with consumers in the future?
I think that's
So it's a
super
lot of
interesting,
sources.
and it's
We pull a
yeah.
lot of stuff together.
Which for me as a data nerd, I'm like, "Oh my god, this is exactly what I want." And I think it's really amazing that you make that information public. It's not something that Ford is just using to get its competitive edge, which I'm sure some of it is, but for the
Some of
most
it,
part,
yeah.
it is. Yeah.
We put our trend site or we put some data points public. Absolutely. I will say a lot of this stuff though that we do, of course, we do keep internal so that we have our own secret
Yeah.
sauce.
But that public access to information, the democratization of information is so important because smaller brands and marketers who need to be thinking in the future need to have that crystal ball, quote unquote, can lean
Sure.
on the businesses that have the budgets to build out these amazing these departments that are able to do this that might not be possible to a smaller brand. So I think it's really cool that
For sure.
that's a huge component of it is making that information accessible to the public. And for me,
Yeah.
as selfishly as a digital marketer, I'm like, next time someone asks me to look at the future, I'm gonna be like, I know where I'm going.
That's great. Yeah, and absolutely. Because at the end of the day, to me, it's all about what you do with it. These are data points. So the way that you choose to interpret them and use them and apply them within your realm is completely up to the user. So that, yeah, in terms of us democratizing it, I feel like a lot of the things that you'll see here, I love having actual numbers to put to things. And I think that a lot of the ways that we like formulate our questions might be a little bit unique or different. But the truth is, a lot of these trends, you will look at them and you'll go, oh, yeah, yeah, I see that. I see that every day. A lot of the stuff you'll look at and think, oh, of course, this makes sense. So in a lot of ways, I feel like we're just providing data for the things that a lot of us kind of intuitively are already seeing happening. But again, it's in how you use it, how you apply it, how do you understand what it means to see it shifting between, Generation Z all the way up to your boomers? Like how might that give us indicators for what the future looks like if we're seeing a value difference, for example, in Gen Z or in millennials? If we fast forward a few years, what does that mean for the way that they are interacting with products and services?
I love that. And I think your session is going to be so empowering for people at Digital Summit Las Vegas, because it's one of those really thought leadership focused sessions. But it's essentially a fundamental understanding of how, as a digital marketer, you can lean on tools that you have built in your team to be able to kind of create your own crystal ball of sorts, to feel like
That's right.
your team can have confidence in the data that you're bringing in and how you make decisions about your audience. So thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's going to be awesome. Reminder, Digital Summit Las Vegas is happening March 13th and 14th. We're going to dig in a little bit on a lightning round just to get to know you a little bit better as one of
Okay.
our speakers. So we'll go through that real quick. All right, first one. Share your obsession. Is there any show or podcast or book that you are currently really into?
Yes, I'm going to share a personal one, and then I'll also share a work one because
Perfect.
it's really interesting. Okay. Um, so on the personal side, I just finished The Fourth Wing and Iron Flame, which are ridiculously interesting to read. They're kind of in the fantasy realm. I say it's like Harry Potter meets Hunger Games, but
Love it.
that's like my right now. I'm so angry that the next book isn't out yet because I can't wait to see what happens next. Um, and then on the work side, there was a really great book released just last year called The Fourth Turning Is Now, that talks about this like um, cyclical nature of how the world works, and that we are basically about to hit this kind of crisis like climax. It feels a little doomsday, I'll be honest, but it's a really interesting look at the way um, things work, especially if you're thinking about as a futurist. Um, it's basically kind of predicting how we'll go through some cyclical stages. So if you're interested in one that does talk a little bit about the future, I would recommend that one.
Love that. If you could switch lives with any fictional character for a day, who would it be?
I got to go with Wonder Woman. I want some more
Yes,
like superpowers. I need superpowers in my life.
I know. Oh, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
is there anywhere untraditional that you go either online or anywhere to get inspired to do your work every day?
Um, you know, being in the futuring space, I find like science fiction and TV are pretty helpful to get your brain thinking about how things might be different. Like things like Black Mirror, I think are always these really kind of interesting cautionary tales, right? And
Mhm.
then the other place I go, like I'm a mom, I have a 4-year-old, and looking at the world through the eyes of a child is often a really great way to kind of get out of your own way and to experience things differently and look at it from a new perspective. So that would be my other one, is like put yourself in the shoes of your kid again. Like how do you relate to things? What do you trust? What do you lean into? What is interesting to you? And that often is also another kind of fun way to get inspiration.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing, Jen. This was awesome to have you on the show. Again, feel free to join us in Las Vegas for Digital Summit happening March 13th and 14th for Jen's session and a bunch of other amazing digital marketing folks. Jen, thanks so much for being here, and I hope you have a great day.
Thanks, you too.